The Regency is easy to romanticize. It gives us glittering ballrooms, candlelit courtship, elegant country houses, and the kind of beautiful clothing that makes the whole era look impossibly charming. It is the world of Jane Austen, of drawing rooms and dances, of the season in London, when the wealthy gathered to socialize, make matches, and display their place in society. But that world only lasted for part of the year. Because once Parliament rose, the balls ended, and fashionable society drifted out of London. The Regency elite had to go somewhere. And that is where the story becomes much more interesting. What did these people actually do when they were not rushing from one grand event to another? How did they spend their summers, their time in the countryside, their quieter months away from the spotlight? The answer is not quite as dreamy as modern period dramas make it seem. Yes, there were stately homes, garden walks, house parties, music, riding, reading, and seaside trips. But there were also chamber pots, household accounts, tenant concerns, long journeys on difficult roads, and the constant work of maintaining wealth, status, and appearance. Regency life outside the season could be beautiful, but it was never effortless. So today, we are stepping away from the ballroom and into the rest of elite Regency life. The country estates, the smaller gatherings, the summer routines, the travel, the entertainments, and the realities that made all that elegance possible. Because if the season was the performance, then this was everything happening behind it. For many wealthy families, leaving London was not just fashionable, it was practical. The city during the warmer months could be crowded, dirty, noisy, and unpleasantly hot. This was long before modern sanitation, modern plumbing, or anything like air conditioning. Streets were packed with people, horses, traffic, smoke, and waste. Even for the rich, London was not always comfortable. So when the season ended, those who had the means often returned to the countryside. And for the nobility in particular, that meant returning to something far more important than a summer retreat. The country estate was not simply a beautiful house where one went to relax. It was a symbol of family identity, social rank, inherited power, and most importantly, income. A great house in the country was often tied to land that had belonged to the same family for generations. That land produced rent, food, status, and influence. Tenants worked it. Servants maintained it. Stewards helped manage it. And the family itself, especially the man who headed the household, was expected to oversee the whole structure. So while the countryside may look peaceful in paintings, these estates were not decorative backdrops. They were working centers of wealth. Depending on the family, the estate itself might be modest by aristocratic standards, or enormous enough to feel more like a private world. There could be gardens, parkland, tenant farms, kitchens, servants' quarters, libraries, studies, stables, and rooms designed specifically to impress visitors. The beauty was real, but so was the labor required to sustain it. That did not mean life in the country was idle. In fact, for a family of rank, the estate required constant attention. Accounts had to be reviewed, tenants and servants managed, repairs overseen, supplies ordered, and social obligations maintained. The man at the head of the household was expected to take an interest in the land and the income it produced, even if much of the daily work was handled by stewards, housekeepers, and other trusted staff. For the rest of the family, country life followed a quieter rhythm than London, but it was not empty. People rode horses, walked through the grounds, visited neighbors, practiced music, read novels and poetry, wrote letters, sketched, painted, and played games indoors and out. Men might shoot, fence, or ride across the estate. Women might read, draw, play the pianoforte, work on needlework, or join in riding, archery, and lawn games. It was a life designed to appear leisurely, but much of that leisure was highly structured. And then there was the social life of the countryside. It may have been smaller than the season in London, but it did not disappear. Families still called on one another, still hosted dinners, picnics, music evenings, and private entertainments, and still watched one another with the same interest in status, influence, and marriage prospects. In some ways, the smaller setting only made those interactions more intimate, and sometimes more strategic. House parties were especially important. Unlike a London ball where guests came and went in a single evening, a country house party could last for days. Roads were slow, travel was tiring, and once guests arrived, they stayed. That gave hosts a perfect chance to impress, to flatter, to build alliances, and, if they wished, to quietly encourage a promising match between the right young lady and the right wealthy gentleman. And this is where Regency country life becomes especially revealing. From a distance, it looks peaceful, elegant even. A lovely bedroom prepared for guests, tables full of food, gentle music in the drawing room, ladies at tea, small conversations by the fire, a picnic on the lawn. Everything appears graceful, effortless, and perfectly arranged. But of course, none of it was effortless. Every polished surface, every laid table, every warmed bedroom, every fresh dessert, every pressed gown, every glowing candle, every decanter set out at exactly the right moment. All of it depended on work. A great house was supposed to feel calm, but behind that calm was motion. Servants cleaning, carrying, polishing, washing, preparing rooms, tending fires, setting out food, moving dishes, changing linens, emptying chamber pots, managing guests, and doing it all in a way that kept the labor almost invisible. That invisibility was part of the illusion. The ideal country visit was meant to feel natural, as though comfort simply existed there, as though fruit appeared on the table by itself, as though guest rooms stayed fresh on their own, as though tea arrived at the perfect hour because the world was orderly and kind. But the order came from people, usually many people, and most of them lived lives that looked nothing like those of the family they served. Even the pleasures of the house party had calculation behind them. The music was entertainment, yes, but also display. The meal was hospitality, but also evidence of wealth. The guest room was comfort, but also reputation. A well-run country house told visitors that this family had taste, money, discipline, and social standing. It was not just about enjoying the summer. It was about proving that one belonged at the top of society. And that mattered because the countryside was not separate from ambition. It simply dressed ambition in softer colors. And even beyond the house itself, the summer months offered one more luxury the season could not: movement. Not the frantic movement of London society from one ball to the next, but a slower kind. Visits, excursions, drives, tours, and carefully planned escapes from routine. If the season was about being seen, the countryside was about choosing where and with whom one wished to be seen. Some families stayed close to home, filling their days with gardens, picnics, calls, music, and private dinners. Others traveled. Spa towns and seaside resorts became fashionable retreats, offering fresh scenery, healthful airs, mineral waters, sea bathing, and the chance to mingle in a setting that felt more relaxed than London, while still being distinctly social. A visit to Bath, Cheltenham, Brighton, or a favorite coastal town could combine leisure, reputation, and a touch of medical respectability all at once. There was also a growing pleasure in domestic tourism. With travel on the continent made more difficult by war, many wealthy Britons turned inward and began touring the beauties of their own country instead. Great houses, landscaped estates, romantic ruins, mountain views, lakes, gardens, and famous parks became attractions in their own right. Visiting an impressive estate was not unlike visiting a monument to power, because that is exactly what it was. And that may be one of the strangest and most revealing parts of elite Regency life. Even relaxation could become a performance. A walk by the lake, a tea table in the garden, a well-appointed guest chamber, a glittering supper, a polished silver service, a house full of visitors. All of it could look natural, but all of it spoke. It said this family had resources. It said this house was well run. It said these people belonged to a world of comfort, taste, and influence. But of course, comfort in this world was never evenly shared. For every family gliding through gardens in pale muslin and polished boots, there were servants carrying trays, making beds, scrubbing floors, blacking grates, polishing silver, washing linens, and keeping the whole illusion alive. The elegance was real, but so was the labor beneath it. And that is what makes life outside the season so fascinating. It was quieter than the London whirl, but it was never empty. It was beautiful, highly structured, deeply unequal, and full of performances that felt softer only because they were set against lawns, lakes, flowers, and afternoon light. And perhaps that is the best way to understand the Regency elite outside the season. The parties were smaller, the pace was slower, and the setting was greener, quieter, and more private. But the same world was still there. The same concern with rank, the same need to impress, the same dependence on service, inheritance, and social performance. The difference was that, in the country, all of it was softened by beauty. Wealth looked more graceful beside a lake than in a crowded London ballroom. Ambition looked more innocent in a garden walk than in a marriage mart. Labor became easier to ignore when it disappeared behind polished silver, starched linen, fresh flowers, and rooms prepared to perfection. But none of those comforts appeared by magic, and none of them were shared equally. So while the Regency off-season may sound quieter than the social whirl of London, it was not a pause from elite life. It was simply elite life in another form, one built on land, display, routine, hospitality, and the careful maintenance of status. The ballroom may have closed for the summer, but society itself never really went away, and that is part of what makes this world so fascinating. It was elegant, cultivated, and often genuinely beautiful, but it was also narrow, performative, and deeply dependent on the invisible work of others. Outside the season, the Regency elite were still doing what they always did, managing privilege, displaying comfort, and turning everyday life into another stage on which status could quietly shine. Thank you for watching. If you value history told carefully and accurately, consider staying with this channel and subscribing. The past deserves precision as much as curiosity,